You're listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, the show for people smart enough to get out of the wrong relationship and bold enough to do it without losing their damn minds. Hosted by Ksenia Mensch, a divorce strategist and straight-talking badass, this podcast is your no-fluff, no-shame, take-control guide to surviving litigated divorce with clarity, guts, and zero regrets. Let's get into it. Here's Ksenia.
You're listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, and today I'm doing another episode on domestic violence, a very serious and often misunderstood area of law. I want to shed more light and dive into this issue from the perspective of a criminal law attorney. Joining me is Fred Tigaraja from Right Choice Law, a criminal defense attorney with extensive experience handling domestic violence cases. He brings valuable insight into how these cases really work, what the law actually says, and what both victims and the accused need to understand. Fred, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Ksenia.
So first, I just want to know, such a unique area of law, and criminal defense attorney, again, you have to work with really bad people and see really bad stories. So how did you get into that area of law?
After law school, I actually joined the district attorney's office in Santa Clara County. So I went to law school at SC. I grew up in Southern California. I went to law school at USC. And then I really wanted to be a prosecutor and ended up at the prosecutor's office in Santa Clara County in San Jose. I was there for 4 years. While I was there, I spent 1 year on the domestic violence unit. So I prosecuted hundreds of domestic violence cases and probably read several hundred domestic violence police reports. Uh, then after the DA's office, I decided to start my own criminal defense practice. So that's how I ended up doing criminal defense. And I wanted to move back down to be closer to family, which is why I ended up back down in Southern California, in Orange County specifically.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of the backdrop to how I ended up in criminal defense, and because of my expertise in domestic violence prosecution, it's been helpful in defending a wide variety of domestic violence cases, from very de minimis cases like pushing and shoving to very serious cases. I've had clients accused of stabbing and even shooting their significant others.
Mhm.
So and I'm not saying any domestic violence is good. I'm just saying that there's a range of
Yes.
conduct, from very minor conduct to extremely dangerous conduct.
Well, this is a perfect segue to understand what domestic violence is legally defined by law. Because again, I think there are so many different misconceptions and there are common understandings by common folks. Again, like pushing and shoving, I don't even think it's a domestic violence because there is no trace left on your body. But how is it legally defined by law?
So domestic violence is actually, I would say that there's two almost types of definitions. There's a type of domestic violence that's used in family court, and there's what is used in criminal court, and those are different. Family court is actually much broader. So in criminal court, there are two criminal charges that specifically relate to domestic violence. One is Penal Code Section 243E1, and that is basically, you know, any kind of when you use physical force against a partner or a significant other, someone you've had a romantic relationship with, although it could be, but rarely is, could be even, so someone you've had, sorry, an intimate dating relationship with, whether even it's an ex-girlfriend or current
Mhm.
partner, and it doesn't result in an injury, that's misdemeanor domestic violence. And it's prosecuted under Penal Code Section 243E1. Penal Code Section 273.5 is the same thing, domestic violence where force is used and it results in some kind of mark or injury. And
Mhm.
depending on the severity of the mark or the injury, if it's a light scratch, or a minor bruise, it could be a misdemeanor. But if it's more significant injury, it will be prosecuted as a felony. Now, there are other crimes that come under what we call this sort of domestic violence umbrella that
Mhm.
aren't physical force, but for example, if you grab an alleged victim or you grab a victim's phone, let's say she's trying to call the police and you grab her phone and prevent her from calling the police, That's a crime, and it comes under the domestic violence, like I said, umbrella. Stalking is a common crime that is associated with domestic violence. Harassing phone calls, you constantly calling someone,
Mm-hmm.
or texting them or harassing them, is a. So these are all crimes. The reason I put them under the domestic umbrella, stalking, you could be stalking someone that's not someone that you have a romantic relationship with, okay? Or you could be
Mm-hmm.
stalking someone that you do have a romantic relationship with. When you are stalking someone you do or did have a romantic relationship with, then that's considered a domestic violence type crime. But it can be a non-domestic violence type crime depending on your relationship with the victim.
Mm-hmm.
The first two crimes I mentioned are always domestic violence because the very definition of the crime is it's battery on someone that you've had an intimate relationship with.
Got it.
The way this differs a little bit from family is generally, you have let's say you have a very, sort of argumentative and just sort of bad marriage, and you've got, for the sake of argument, I'm going to say it's the husband abusing the wife because that's usually the case. Although
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's the opposite. But let's say you have a husband who's screaming at his wife, yells at his wife, calls her names, denigrates her, is emotionally abusive. None of that is criminal domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be family domestic violence. So in family court, the family judges take a very broad definition of domestic violence, and that includes emotional abuse, verbal abuse, controlling,
Got
financial
it.
abuse. All of that can constitute domestic violence in the family court divorce realm. But
Mm-hmm.
in criminal court, it doesn't make a difference if the husband yells at his wife 1,000 times. It's whether or not there's actual violence involved.
What if she's afraid of him? Does that make it criminally chargeable?
I
No?
mean, again, it depends on well, it's not so much her response, it's what he did.
Okay.
So listen, if I'm in a relationship with someone and I don't know, I'm loud, I bang doors loudly, I have a loud voice, I yell at the TV, and my significant other is afraid, that's not a crime. I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
anything wrong simply because she's afraid and she's sensitive. I'm not even yelling at her. If I just happen to yell at the TV and she suddenly becomes afraid, that doesn't make it a crime. So her
Mm-hmm.
reactions aren't what make it a crime. It's the perpetrator's actions that
Got
make
it.
it a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Now, her reactions might be evidence that the crime has occurred, but what how she feels doesn't determine whether or not a domestic violence took place. What determines whether or not domestic violence took place is what the abuser actually did. And
Got
again,
it.
if I'm yelling at her, screaming at her, calling her names, great. She might have a reason to go get a restraining order against me in family court. She might have a reason to get divorced from me, but she does not have a basis for, or the DA's office doesn't have a basis for a criminal complaint,
Got it.
simply because, the perpetrator is yelling at their significant other.
So what are the typical type of charges? So you mentioned battery. That is like it's a domestic violence because it's a battery in intimate relationships, right? That take place in intimate relationships. What other charges
But
that
very,
can be
very,
criminally?
yeah. The most common types of criminal charges that are associated with domestic violence cases, besides actual physical domestic violence, are stalking, um, harassing phone calls, interfering or taking a phone away and interfering with someone's ability to call the police, um, restraining order violations, or protective order violations. Um, those are those probably the most common.
Okay. How okay, this is my curiosity at this point. So you're saying if somebody takes away your phone, and you can't call police, and by the time police or whatever police gets eventually there and the perpetrator gives the phone back, how can you prove that the phone was taken?
Well, how do you prove it? A lot of things. I mean, oftentimes what will happen
Everything is
is
allegedly.
everything is legislative. So first of all, it kind of goes to what we consider evidence. I think, and this is more of a broader conversation, not just specific to domestic violence cases, but
Hmm.
most people, maybe you, maybe the average person who's not familiar with the law, they think evidence is something that's sort of like real, like a picture or a video, or there has to be
Yes.
some kind of injury or a mark to confirm that physical force occurred. when in fact, evidence is simply one person saying something happened. That's evidence. If a
Uh,
witness comes in and says X, Y, and Z happened, that's evidence that X, Y,
Okay.
and Z happened. Now, whether or not that evidence is believable is a different story. Whether or not that evidence can be corroborated by physical evidence is a different story. But a witness simply saying it occurred is evidence.
Got it.
So when the police arrive and, let's say, you know, let's say the perpetrator took the victim's cell phone, but the victim managed to get to a landline and call the police, and the police arrive, and the cell phone is already back with the victim. Victim says, "Hey, he took my phone for like 2 minutes to prevent me. I was in the midst of calling 911 and he grabbed my phone away from me." That's evidence that he has committed this crime of preventing her from calling the police.
Got it.
He might deny it. He might say that's BS,
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes to court and we figure out who's telling the truth and what the status really is. But uh, that's evidence. Her statement is evidence.
Okay. So now again, this is a perfect segue into what happens when somebody is arrested and you're in court. So what is the process like there?
Well, first thing is when you're arrested for domestic violence, um, I want to talk to you a little bit about how, even from the arrest part, because
Mm-hmm.
many years ago, I would say the OJ trial sort of just changed everything, and
Mm-hmm.
what Nicole Simpson went through has changed everything. Before the OJ trial, sadly, a lot of times domestic violence was sort of like handled at home. Like the police would show up, they'd see bruises, and they'd be like, all right, you guys sort this stuff out. Obviously, the wrong approach. But since OJ, the OJ case, now, the pendulum has swung the complete opposite way. Now, if the police show up, someone is getting arrested. It doesn't matter how light or de minimis the domestic violence is. If the police show up, someone is being arrested for a crime and someone's going to spend the night in jail. That's just flat out.
Hmm.
So what happens is when a client calls me after they get arrested, they'll say, "Okay, I got arrested on, Saturday. They've got court 5 days later or 6 days later on Friday." First thing we want to do is try to talk to the prosecutor's office to see if we can get them to drop or even reject the case, reduce the charges or reject the case completely. And I'd say that we
Mm-hmm.
have some success in doing that. And partly that's based on the fact that the police are always arresting people for felony domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll arrest you, and if they can, this is not just again for domestic violence cases. When the police arrest someone, they're always trying to arrest them for the maximum charge possible,
Hmm.
whether that's fair or not fair. They want to get them for the maximum charges, which increases their bail and makes, so it's more likely that they'll stay in custody longer. So when someone is now facing, felony domestic violence charges for pushing their wife, I'm not justifying the, pushing their wife, but the charges are disproportionate to the conduct that's involved. So the first thing we want to do is try to talk to the DA's office to see if we can get them to drop the charges from felony to misdemeanor or even reject the case completely.
Mm-hmm.
And we have I've had a lot of success doing that. Obviously, I can't guarantee that it's going to occur, but that is the first step. Then, if charges are filed and we have to go to court, then the next thing we want to do is we always start off with a not guilty plea. And it doesn't make a difference if my client is telling me, hey, I actually did these things, or there's a lot of evidence against me. It doesn't make a difference. Again, it doesn't make a difference the type of crime. We always start off with a not guilty plea because that's what enables you to review the evidence and start
Mm-hmm.
negotiations. So we get the evidence, we get the police reports, we get a copy of the 911 call, we review it, we review it with our client to make sure, okay, is this accurate? Is this not accurate? Okay, what were you thinking? We get the bite. So the police officers, when they interview our clients and the victims, they usually have body worn cameras that record
Yes.
everything. So we'll get the body worn camera footage because sometimes what they write in the police report is not what's actually occurring on video. So we'll take a look at the videos to see, hey, is the police report accurate or inaccurate? And then we'll question our clients. Hey, why, you told the police this. Why'd you, what's your explanation for that? If they can't come up with an explanation, sometimes we come up with the explanation for them. Here's your explanation for that. So, and then after that, we a large part of what happens in court is kind of dependent on what my clients want. So if my client comes to me and says, I messed up, but I don't want to do any jail time, then we'll go through the evidence, try to look for ways to put our client in the best light possible, and then sit down with the prosecutor and try to reach that resolution. But if our client says, I didn't do anything wrong, this is all BS, and I don't want to plead guilty to anything, then most likely the case is going to go to trial.
Hmm.
So it's a different approach then. We're not really trying to sit down and negotiate with the DA. We're just trying to get all the evidence, go through it, find ways to undermine it, start prepping for trial, and
Hmm.
then postpone the case to a point in time when we're ready to go to trial.
Got it. So what happens if the victim doesn't want to press charges? A lot of times there is a fear that there will be some retaliation against the victim, so they just don't want to press any charges. So what happens then?
Well, I will say that the vast majority of people who are listed as victims in crimes do not want to press charges, but for different reasons than what you are stating, in my opinion. You're
Okay.
saying they want to press charges because they're fearful. I think they don't want to press charges a lot of times because they're getting back together with their alleged abuser. So, I have clients who, it's a push and a shove, and the victim may have called the police, at the time, but they regret it, and they want to continue living with this person and continue on having a relationship with this person. And then, and they're like, oh, this minor thing, it really shouldn't be, criminal charges. Then I have clients, mainly women again, who are truly victims of long-term domestic violence, who unfortunately have been either brainwashed or I don't know what, but they are controlled and they refuse to leave their abuser despite the fact that they are being abused over and over and over again. And they
Hmm.
will also come forward and tell the police and the DA's office, I don't want to press charges. It's not up to them, it's up to the district attorney's office. So, once the police are, well, if they don't, I mean, this is going to sound crazy. If they don't want to press charges, then the police shouldn't be called in the first place. But once the police are involved, then it's beyond their control. Then the police will interview them. They'll prepare a police report. It gets sent to the prosecutor's office.
Hmm.
Then the prosecutor's office will determine whether to file charges. And speaking as a former prosecutor in the domestic violence unit, if I only filed cases where the victim wants prosecution, I'd be dismissing like 95% of all domestic violence cases.
Yes.
Okay. So
Hmm.
that can't be the standard. They're going to
Hmm.
decide whether, regardless of what the victim wants, the DA's office has a duty to determine whether or not charges should be filed in any specific case, independent of what the victim wants or the alleged
Okay.
victim wants.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, if police are involved at this point, it's kind of out of your hands what happens next. I mean,
Yes.
I imagine the victim can refuse to testify, and that will make it more difficult and challenging for the prosecutor's office to get the right judgment outcome.
Yes, that's true. I mean, certainly a victim can, not participate in a criminal case, like you said, refuse to testify, although that has to be done in a very certain, in a specific type of way, and that leads to other complications. But the victim not cooperating is something that can be useful to the defense and can
Yes.
hurt the prosecution, but it doesn't control whether or not the case is getting prosecuted. It doesn't
Okay.
control whether or not charges are getting filed.
Yes.
It doesn't control whether or not the DA even goes to, I mean, sometimes the DA's office will even go to, they'll say, listen, you don't want to cooperate? Fine, we're going to go to trial without you. You
Hmm.
know,
Got it. So, sometimes victims can be awarded the restraining orders. So, what are those and how effective they are? Because I remember I had one person who said something that stuck with me. Restraining orders don't protect from bullets. And when a victim gets a restraining order against a perpetrator, a lot of times it becomes almost like a more dangerous situation because the perpetrator may have lost the job because of that. They may have lost, I do not know, some status. I do not know, but they may feel like a person they have nothing to lose and they just go for it. So, how
I
effective
I
are
disagree.
those?
I disagree, but I want to tell you a little bit about this. So first of all, there's two types of orders. There's what we call protective orders,
Okay.
criminal orders, and then there are domestic violence restraining orders. Criminal protective orders are issued in criminal court. Okay, they're often issued at the very first court date. So a- actually, when you get arrested, the victim can apply or will be offered something called an emergency protective order. It lasts for 5 court days. So if you get arrested on a Saturday, it'll last you through the following Friday. Which is why, for example, the Orange County DA's office, when you get arrested, they want to have the case on calendar within a week so that there's no gap between the emergency protective order and what happens in court. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But other counties are not like that. Other counties will set court dates out, weeks or months later. So sometimes there'll be a gap in coverage. Then if charges are filed and you show up in criminal court, a judge must consider issuing something called a criminal protective order. It's very similar to a restraining order. However, depending on the type of case, if it's a felony case, it's almost always a no contact order.
Mm-hmm.
But if in a misdemeanor case, if the victim or alleged victim comes to court and expresses an interest in something called peaceful contact, sometimes, not always, sometimes the judge will say, okay, I'll let you guys continue to hang out. Obviously, you can't beat her or threaten her or kill her, but you guys can continue to have contact with one another. It's called a peaceful contact
Okay.
or no negative contact protective order. Okay. That's on the criminal side. In family court, a victim of domestic violence can pursue a domestic violence restraining order. Okay.
Okay.
There are some differences. In family court, the victim has to actually make the effort, file some paperwork, put in a declaration, I got abused, I got pushed, I got shoved, whatever. And so they have to take the effort at going to court, filing it, having a judge granting it. Okay. In criminal court, even if the victim doesn't want it, the judge still has to consider issuing a protective order, and no con and protective orders get issued all the time, whether the victim likes it or not. Okay, so that's
Okay.
one difference. Okay. Second difference is, again, in criminal court, to get to criminal court, there has to be some usually physical violence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But in family court, a victim can apply for a domestic violence restraining order based on emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, abuse that doesn't necessarily correlate to specifically criminal conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Now, um, in terms of getting the restraining order and you mentioning, hey, listen, sometimes that might result in this person doing worse things. I can see how that might be the mentality of a typical domestic violence victim, but that would probably pervade every aspect of the relationship. I don't want to say anything to get him mad. I have to do things this way or he will beat me. I don't want to, speak out of turn because then he's going to slap me. Sadly, if you're at that point in time and if that's the way you think, then God help you because you're already so afraid to live life and you're afraid to do anything because of how this person may react. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if the abuser is so violent, okay, that they are going to hurt you because you get a restraining order, I can guarantee you they are hurting you nonstop even if you don't have a restraining order.
True.
No one, there is no person in the world that is just a nice, normal individual who doesn't engage in violence. And then suddenly, because a restraining order is obtained against them, that
Mm-hmm.
turns them into a homicidal maniac. They were a homicidal maniac before you decided to get the restraining order. In fact, that's what prompted you to get it.
Yes.
Okay? So
Mm-hmm.
getting the restraining order is actually your only way to defend yourself against someone who is, going to be abusive. Obviously calling the police, having them arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like you said, there are cases where people are threatening or really abusive or, controlling, or some victims will get a restraining order but not report to the police for different reasons. And having a restraining order is a very important first step in defending yourself. You're right. This piece of paper doesn't protect you. But guess what? If you call the police and this guy gets arrested, once he bails out of custody, what's protecting you?
Nothing. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, nothing in this world is going to be, it's not like you can live in a vault built with steel walls and,
Mm-hmm.
nothing can get to you. There's always a chance something can get to you. But having the restraining order is important because then it enables the police to respond more quickly. In fact, I have lots of cases or situations where someone calls the police and they're like, I don't know, we really can't help you. this sounds like a domestic disturbance, but you know what? This sounds like a bad marriage, you know? You're just gonna have to, but they got a restraining order in place, and then they call the police. Police will be over there in no time, arresting that person for restraining order violation. Restraining order
Mm-hmm.
violations are taken very seriously, and the police, definitely respond to those quickly and forcefully. So you need that restraining order to, start establishing, your defense.
What's the difference? Because I know there is also, like you mentioned, no contact or peaceful contact. What's the difference
Yeah.
between no contact and restraining order or protective order?
So there can be so there can be no contact and there can be some contact. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be no contact and some contact in a domestic violence restraining order. And there can be no contact and some contact in a criminal protective order. So the no contact versus some contact has nothing to do with, I mean, it can be in both.
Okay,
Okay.
got it.
I'll tell you a typical situation. Domestic violence cases. This is where the victim, usually the woman, but sometimes the guy, but the woman will file, the victim will file for a restraining order, but they have kids in common. So she says, listen, he's been abusive to me and I need him to stay away from me. And he goes to court and says, all right, and I want him to stay away from the house and I want him to stay away from my kids, our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he goes to court, he's like, well, listen, first off, I disagree with what she said. But second of all, while we're litigating this, you can't take my kids away from me. I need to be able to see my kids. Okay. So what they might do in a situation like that is they might allow an exception for him to have contact with her on like Talking Parents or My Family Wizard or some app, or even text messages to just say, I'm going to be there at 7 p.m. to pick up the kids, or I'm going to be at the police station at 7 p.m. for our custody exchange,
Mm-hmm.
so they can allow some contact with one another. Okay, but that is usually, something that the victim has to, agree to, or sometimes the judge might make it happen. This is usually really the only times contact is allowed in domestic violence restraining order cases is when there are kids involved. There really is no other reason why there needs to be
Mm-hmm.
contact between two people on the domestic violence restraining order side.
Mm-hmm.
On the criminal side, it's a very different story because in criminal protective orders, these orders are being issued against the wishes of the victim, right? In restraining orders, the victim wants the restraining order. In
True.
criminal, the only time this argument about peaceful contact is coming up is when the order is being issued against their wishes. So really, the peaceful contact there is, I'm still in love with this guy. We're living together. I don't want a protective order. Judge is like, too bad. I think this could be a dangerous situation. All right, well, at least make it peaceful contact. At least let us hang out. At least let us eat. I had a case just last week on Friday. It was a felony domestic violence in Riverside County. And at the court, these people, my client is in his 60s, no criminal record, CEO of his own company. And, he got into an altercation with his wife, who they, at the end of the altercation, unfortunately, she ends up with some injuries. So at his first court date, the and they were reconciling. They're in joint therapy together, individual therapy together. They were going through a divorce. They had their own lawyers, and now they want to get back together. First court date, judge is like, yeah, I don't care that the both of you want to hang out. No contact. Okay. The judge made a tiny exception for you guys can see each other on Zoom during joint therapy, and that's it. And so the problem is my client and his wife, they own a company together, and it's got like 200 employees, and it's been logistically impossible for them to run this company together while this protective order is in place. So we
Mm-hmm.
had to go back to court. We filed all these paperwork. We're litigating it. We had another hearing last Friday, contested hearing. Contested means the DA opposed. And despite the fact that we had showed evidence of my client in individual therapy, she's in individual therapy, they're both in joint therapy, all these letters from their employment, he's taking the domestic violence class, all these things were showing, to justify modifying the order. Judge is like, all right, I'll let you guys talk to each other on the phone and email. That's it. You still can't hang out. So, I mean, there are some times, no matter what the victim wants, and no matter
Mm-hmm.
all the efforts the defendant is making, judge doesn't, allow too much contact. So,
Mm-hmm.
so usually the idea, but getting back to your question, the idea of having contact in criminal cases, it's usually when the victim doesn't want prosecution
Yes.
and wants to be with the person. But it
Mm-hmm.
comes up in the context of family cases when there's children involved, because that's a situation where the victim doesn't want contact with their,
Mm-hmm.
why the restraining order even exists.
Yes. Because usually, like you said, when it's when it's the victim looking for a restraining order on the family law side, that victim doesn't want any contact. That's why they're putting, I want a restraining order. I want to keep that person at a distance from me, like safe distance. So, yeah. But the other one, if it's forced by the judge because the judge finds there is a reasonable evidence to expect that there may be another instance of the altercation. Yeah, I can see how no contact or some minimum contact is needed. Um, how does the legal system handle false accusations? I'm sure you've seen it, the phone call and like, oh, they did this and that, and how do you handle it?
False accusations are handled the same way actual accusations are handled. I mean, we have to go through all the evidence. We got to go to court.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing is, so because many women or victims are in this cycle of domestic violence where they've been abused and then they
Mm-hmm.
their abuser and things are nice for a while, and then the guy gets angry again and hurts them again, and then apologizes, and then there's a period of peace. So there's this constant cycle of domestic violence going on, and some victims can't break free from it. And those victims will come to the police, or they come to the DA's office or come to court, and they're going to say, I lied. Nothing bad really happened.
Mm,
I don't want charges to be filed against him. Okay. And then there's a few people, maybe more than a few, who really did lie, who are trying to get someone in trouble, who are upset. Their husband cheated on them. Oh, I'm going to teach him. I'm going to call the police and say he pushed me.
yes.
Okay. And then they regret it. And then they come to the DA's office and they say, listen, I made a big mistake. I lied. I was upset with him. Okay. DA's office can't tell the difference. They
Mm-hmm.
can't tell the difference between the women who come forward who are actually lying at the time and the women who are coming forward and who are lying now, but were telling the truth at the time. To them, it's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And they treat everybody as, we think you're lying now and you were actually telling the truth then. So that's everybody gets treated the same way, which means everyone is, prosecuted in theory.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have a client, oh, by the way, when you say a client who's falsely accused, the only way I know someone's falsely accused is what they tell me. And what they tell me may not necessarily be the truth, right?
You have
So
great clients.
there's only no one knows what happened except
Mm-hmm.
for my client and the person they're accused of hurting. That's it. And there's some element, maybe one person's telling the truth, maybe both people are kind of fitting, maybe there's some element of truth to both. We don't know. But no matter what my client tells me, I 100% don't know the truth. At the
Mm-hmm.
DA's office, no matter what the victim tells the police, the DA's office doesn't 100% know the truth. Okay, so but when my client says I didn't do it, right? Then I guess that fits into this theory of this false accusation.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go through and defend it. Another thing I want to let you know, and this is kind of what makes maybe relationships and the law very complicated, is let's say my client and his wife are arguing, and I don't know, he reaches for something very quickly, and his hand like bumps her shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and she startled and falls back and hits her head. Okay, she might believe in her own head, she might truthfully believe he's committing domestic violence against her, but he may truthfully believe this was just an accident. Now, is that a false accusation when she calls the police?
No, no.
But the crime itself may actually have been an accident. So what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, this idea of, whether an accusation is false depends on, okay, is she lying? That's one type of false accusation. That everyone
Yes.
knows is a false accusation. But is she mistaken about what occurred? Because that could be an accusation that turns out to be false.
Hmm. Well, I'm talking when I was talking false accusations, when I'm saying it's intentional malicious lie. It's not what mistaken just a mistake,
But
right?
Sammy,
This is
that's
what I thought is going to happen, but I see in the eye of the law it's the same. It's either perception what she thought happened or she intentionally lies about it.
But the thing is this, how do you defend against those? How do you defend against listen, if I
Yes.
could sue my neighbor and claim that my neighbor's,
Barks at night.
sidewalk is an infringement on my zoning easement, I could claim someone, broke a contract with me. I mean, the thing is there are people make claims or accusations
Yes.
are false all the time, and that's why the whole reason the litigation world exists, the whole reason there are lawyers who litigate is because somebody is not telling the truth and the other person has to defend them, whether it's corporate law or real estate litigation, corporate litigation, domestic violence
Hmm.
litigation. That's what the law is about.
I had a story a friend of mine shared with me. So she said that her now ex-husband called on her police, made up accusations that she hurt him, and police came over and they looked at the case and nobody was arrested actually, even though you said that right now the police goes into the extreme of they'd rather arrest somebody to make sure that also their liability is protected. But in that case, nobody was arrested. So I wonder if it's almost like to the point that it was so ridiculous that the level of accusations or what the story was presented to the cops that they didn't see any credible threat that they didn't arrest anybody that night.
When I say someone's going to get arrested, a couple things to keep in mind. One, there has to be evidence of physical force on that day. So in other words, if she calls the police and says he's been an a-hole to me and he screams all the time, yeah, no one's going to get arrested,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no physical force. Second thing is he may not have been there at the scene. So, if he had left and she's calling the police and says, this happened to me, and they show up, well, they can't arrest someone if no one's there. So
Mm-hmm.
everything is different, but I will tell you, based on my experiences and what I have seen, 99% of the time, if there's an arrest for domestic violence, if there's a call where domestic violence is being alleged, someone's getting arrested.
Okay. Well, I guess she got lucky that night. Or maybe the accusations were ludicrous. So it's one or
Yeah.
the other. Or there was no physical evidence, even though it was claimed that there was physical violence. So, but can you share one of the most memorable cases or the most disturbing cases that kind of got you? I mean, you're seeing a ton.
I had a case many years ago where my client got into a fight with his wife or the mother of his children. I'm not quite sure what the relationship is, but somebody he was significantly involved with, and they had two children together. And my client was high on drugs, methamphetamine, I think, and he was a amateur or semi-professional boxer, and he got into a fight with his wife in front of the children, two small children, and he was punching her repeatedly. And then during the fight, he grabbed a knife, attempted to stab her, did stab her, and she survived. And apparently that wasn't enough. And he then grabbed a gun and shot her. And she managed to survive that, ran out of the house, managed to flag down a passerby. That person took her to the hospital. Kids are still in the house watching this whole thing.
Mm.
Took her to the hospital. Um, and guess what? 2, 3 months later, she's back together with him. I don't testify. I don't want to press charges. And so he was arrested for attempted murder, but we got the charges reduced to, I think, assault with a deadly weapon. I mean, he went down from a life sentence to a resolution that just really put him in prison for just a few years,
Wow.
mainly because his wife didn't want to testify against him. I mean, it was so sad, that she would do that, and she's not really thinking of I don't know, the kid,
Kids.
but that sadly kind of reflects this the hold that domestic violence has on people,
Hmm.
and how some women can be just really literally abused to the very end, and they won't
Yes.
they won't protect themselves. Then I have other cases, usually more, have a lot more de minimis in nature, I should say, but I have lots of cases where clients are being accused of pushing, shoving, hitting, and it's either in the right before or in the midst of a divorce. And I believe that sometimes victims or alleged victims are claiming domestic violence to gain an advantage in divorce court. I've
Mm-hmm.
had plenty of cases where, I mean, even if something occurred, I have a trial coming up on Monday where the allegation is um, he, I guess he was laying in bed with one of the kids, and it was a bunk bed, and she reached in to like give the kid a hug, and he pushed her away, and she moved up and she hit her head on the bunk bed. That's the claim of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
She got a restraining order against him. A temporary restraining order was granted. We're now litigating the full restraining order. And for like 3 weeks, he didn't get to see any of his children. And now he's on like monitored visitation for, 1 hour, like 2 or 3 hours, like twice a week for months. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm not even saying, first off, he's like, this didn't happen. But secondly, even if it did happen, you lose your kids because she bumps her head on the bunk bed once. And that's to me, that sounds crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So and by the way, as soon as this happened, guess what? As soon as she got the restraining order, guess what? Oh, I want a divorce. I want full custody of the kids, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that these, domestic violence is being bandied about definitely as a litigation tactic, as a divorce tactic, which is sad because there are people who really do suffer from domestic violence.
Yes.
And then there are people who take advantage of the system. And then again, now we don't know what's real, what's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So but anyway, regardless, I have my hands full.
Yeah, for sure. Especially probably here in Orange County. Everybody files. It's such a litigious state. And I mean, our county is very litigious. Everybody is in court all the time, it feels like. And what do you think are the most common misconceptions that you see about domestic violence?
Um, I think there's a misconception that, well, firstly, I think there's a misconception that domestic violence somehow involves something really bad happening. Um, or that because like I said, people can get arrested for felony domestic violence on pushes and shoves.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that there's this idea that, domestic violence can be, this may more pertain to the difference between criminal and family, but, people might think that domestic violence is emotional or verbal, and it can be in divorce court, but that's not considered domestic
Mm-hmm.
violence, in criminal court. Um, so I'd say another misconception that people have that I'm trying to, that I'm trying to correct is people think, oh, if I'm being accused of domestic violence, that's it. My life is over. I'm going to end up with a conviction on my record. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to lose my job. I'm going to lose, whatever rights I have. And that's not true. These cases can be defended. They can be defended very vigorously. We do a lot. I do a lot of domestic violence defense. I'm very successful at it. And I think, contacting an attorney early and working with a good criminal defense attorney or a good family law attorney in family court is going to be, really instrumental in in protecting your rights
Mm-hmm.
and defending yourself. And the flip applies as well. If you're a victim of domestic violence, sometimes it's very helpful to have a lawyer on your side. You don't really need a lawyer so much on the criminal side. Um, but on the family law side, it's
Mm-hmm.
helpful sometimes to have a lawyer help you with paperwork and argue for you in court, just to make sure that your case is being handled properly.
Mm-hmm. So when should people reach out to you? I mean, immediately, like a speed dial?
Um, Certainly, I'm usually not needed until the arrest occurs. Very,
Mm-hmm.
very rarely, I have cases where people have committed some misconduct. Charges have not been filed. They have not been arrested, and they're reaching out to me ahead of time saying, "I think something's coming down the pipeline."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, I can start representing you now, and then we can reach out. don't talk to the police, and we can figure out what's going on with the DA. That's unusual. Domestic violence, that's almost never the case. Every domestic violence client I've ever had has reached out to me either after they've been arrested or they've had a restraining order filed against them. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the times when someone reaches out to me, and I would just say, if that happens, you want to reach out as soon as possible. Don't wait. Don't wait till the day before the court date. Don't wait, until you're figuring out, oh, I got this. I can do this on my own. You want to call someone immediately. There are things you can, especially since sometimes these court dates are just a week away, you know.
Yes.
So you
Mm-hmm.
want to move quickly and get someone on board quickly to defend you as much as you can.
And what is the most efficient way to get in touch with you? Because, like you said, the time frame is very short. Is it the phone? I will provide all your contact information, the notes, but is it the email?
Phone is the easiest way to get a hold of us.
Mm-hmm.
Our my number's on my website, but it's
I'll post it for
yeah, you'll
sure.
post it. And the thing with us is, during work hours from like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I have a dedicated paralegal answering all the calls. She's really good. She'll take down the person's information. She'll take down a summary of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But if you call after hours, that number goes straight to my cell phone. So in theory, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're available. Obviously, if you call at 2 in the morning, you might not get a call back till 7 in the morning, but we're available all the time.
Mm-hmm. And I vouch for that because I know how responsive you are as you know, as a criminal law attorney. I've seen you stepping away from whatever you're doing when you're seeing the calls coming in. So if any of the listeners need your help, you know, they know you got their back. Thank you so much for sharing all the information, expertise. It's so good to understand the difference between domestic violence criminally in criminal law versus family law, because I know for me it was all kind of like one bucket. Everything looks the same, smells the same. I mean, it must be the same, you know? So it's really good to understand the differences, protective orders, restraining orders, and thank you so much for all you do. I mean, I don't like the bad guys, but again, it's all allegedly. And yeah, thank you so much for being a guest here. I
Thank you,
really
Sam.
appreciate your time.
All right. I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you to listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, and until next time.
That's it for this episode of Uncoupled and Unfiltered. If you're loving the raw truth and practical takeaways, do the badass thing and rate and review the show wherever you listen. It helps more good people find their way out of the chaos. And check the show notes. Yeah, we actually put some useful stuff in there. Resources, links, tools, go grab what you need. Until next time, don't settle, don't shrink, and don't look back.